I went to a couple of months ago I went to prison. I did end up leaving prison on the same day, but I do want to go back, and I'm wondering if that makes me a recidivist. I visited Mobilong Prison at Murray Bridge in South Australia, and I did so in the company of a remarkable group of strong and caring women. I'd like to tonight share what was a very moving experience. I visited Mobilong with the Aboriginal Elders Visiting Program, but they are affectionately known as the Grannies Group. There are 12 grannies in Adelaide who now visit prisoners in the Adelaide Women's Prison and Murray Bridge, and they're about to start visiting the Adelaide Remand Centre. There are also 7 grannies who visit Aboriginal prisoners in Port Augusta. The program has been ongoing for some time, but they've only been visiting formally in a structured way for about 8 months. The Grannies Group itself was established in 1999. It was a group of Aboriginal women who came together to discuss their experiences as mothers and grandmothers who had family members who were exiting prison. And they all had kids or grandkids who had either been drug users or been in trouble with the law in some way. They came together to support each other and got some help from the government in terms of a couple of meetings in a forum, but they decided to keep meeting regularly to support each other and the wider community in South Australia. And one of their aims was to foster community support for a community-based approach to drug issues and to reduce the number of drug-related deaths occurring in their networks. They still meet fortnightly to catch up and support each other, and it's also a place for people who've been newly released from prison to come along and get some support. But since those early days, the Grannies Group has become an absolute force to be reckoned with, and I think if you asked people in the South Australian Department for Correctional Services, they'd agree with that. After some years, they began to reach out to young Aboriginal people who were in youth detention, understanding that often these young people felt isolated, marginalised, and very much out of connection with those sustaining factors in their lives like family and kinship. And their visiting program has grown from that. They came up with the idea of visiting prisons regularly to provide that touch of humanity and home to their kin and to other people's kin who were isolated and lonely. And so they've developed this, what I think is probably a unique prison visiting program in Australia, and it has indeed been supported over time by the South Australian Department for Correctional Services. And so it was that I invited myself along and got to visit Mobilong Prison with these wonderful women. And I was able to witness how their combination of love and uncompromising, unflinching strength offers hope and support to some of the most marginalised members of their community. The prison officials greeted us and briefed us, and and included among them was Mr Richard King, the Director of the Aboriginal Services Unit, who's been very supportive of the program. While they were being very polite to me as a visiting senator and doing some briefing, I could see that the women, who were in their 50s, 60s and 70s, older women, were impatient to get on with it and to get out to meet those young men who had come to rely on their visits and were eager to meet them and needed them. So we made our way to a healing circle, and it was a lovely day, so we were able to sit outside. It was a sunny winter day at Murray Bridge. And so we were sitting in a special area that had been developed with circular seats. And I noticed in the middle was a lovely little garden area, a small garden area, and I found out that indeed that had been rocks and rubble at one point, but one of the young prisoners had taken on himself to actually create a garden there, so it was a lovely environment to sit in. Then I witnessed the prisoners coming out and waiting, the young men coming out and had been waiting near the fence for these older women to turn up. And it didn't take long before they came over, and they were hanging over the women and hugging them and kissing them and touching their arm and sitting next to them. And some of the women had relations, grandsons or nephews in the prison at that time, and some of them were like I suppose, proxy grandparents and proxy mothers and aunties. And it struck me just how important that human contact and that human touch was, and I did understand that originally it had been a no-no, but one of the women, Heather Aegis, had been very clear and very firm with the prison authorities that if she was going to come along and do this, she would do it on her terms, and it was an Aboriginal way to have that connection, and indeed she won the day, and they allow that to happen now. So what I witnessed was a group of young to middle-aged men opening up and sharing their stories with these caring women. I understand that in the early days they were very reticent to speak and there wasn't a lot of speaking going on, but clearly what I saw was a need to communicate and speak, and by the same token these older women were very clear, very strong in encouraging the men to understand what had brought them to prison, how they could be strong men for their families and their partners who were outside the prison, and where they could move to from there. I saw that over time the men had opened up and trusted these older women, and the older women had legitimacy and authority, which meant that they could give strong, caring, loving advice that would be taken on board by the men. As well as that, I also saw that there had been a violence prevention program which had become increasingly culturally appropriate, from which the men were also benefiting and learning to open up. And what I really think I saw was that absolute need for people to have an opportunity to leave prison and be able to make something of their lives again, to have that sense that they are valuable and worthwhile and that they matter and that they have not been forgotten while they're in prison. And that's certainly what the Grannies Group offer to these young men. While I was there, they took the opportunity to explain to me and tell me about what they needed when they leave prison. And none of it is brain surgery, brain science. It's all obviously a clear need that people would have leaving prison. They need to have accommodation. They need to have assistance to find employment. They were hungry to work, especially having found to some extent some self-respect through the programs they were doing and the feedback that they were getting from the grannies. They wanted to go out and work and to contribute, and they also needed assistance with drug and alcohol rehabilitation. And it was clear to me that if they weren't given those supports, it would be very difficult for them to make that transition. So I would echo their needs. I will go out and speak to the South Australian government, and I would echo the idea and reiterate the idea that that's what people need to support them if they're going to make a good transition from being in prison into the community. I would also just like to say what respect and admiration I have for those loving, affectionate, strong women who go and make that visit regularly, and I know that if they weren't to turn up, the men would be absolutely bereft. It's an idea and a program that could be trialled in other parts of Australia, I believe.